Hey everyone. So 3.13 is still in PTU, which I think is good considering its current stability, but the last few patches have been almost entirely bug fixes. Because of that, I think it's a pretty safe assumption that they aren't going to make any gameplay balance changes to the new mining subcomponents that got added in this patch. So today I wanted to take a look at those to see how they work and try to help you decide which ones to pick up when you're equipping your prospector or mole. Again though, if there are any major changes with these subcomponents when 3.13 goes live, I'll pin a comment with those changes or make another video. Before we start though, if you end up enjoying this video or if it helps you, please consider leaving a like or subscribing. I really appreciate it if you do. Okay, before we get into the new submodules, I just want to give you guys a bit of an update on the status of the PTU since we've had some patches since the last video I made. It actually just got opened up to all backers, so if you want to check it out yourself, you can do so. Anyway, the current version seems a lot more stable in terms of crashes to desktop in 30Ks, which is good, but there's still some interesting bugs. I think it's getting close to a point where it wouldn't be too bad to send it to live. But yeah, I just wanted to share this interesting bug I encountered here. I spawned my constellation over at Port Olazar, and I walked out to the pad that it told me to go to, but I didn't see it anywhere. At first I thought, oh, it just didn't actually spawn because it does happen sometimes. But as you can see, it did spawn, just not where it was supposed to. Even more interesting though is that the Archimedes did kinda spawn with it, but it's missing most of its hull and it's somehow docked 90 degrees off from where it should be. So yeah, this was an interesting glitch, and I guess the Archimedes was probably responsible for it spawning this high off the pad, but I guess there's still a few issues to work through with docking. I was still able to fly the ship away from the station though, and this was pretty funny to see. Before I dive into all of the different available submodules and what they all do, I just wanted to clear up some questions I have on how they behave. So I watched last week's Star Citizen Live, and one thing that got mentioned was that the submodules disappear at the moment when you have to claim your ship, whether it be from it being blown up or more likely from it disappearing from a 30K. It wasn't clear to me though whether or not this applied to just the consumable subcomponents which have been in the game since 3.12 and are limited use anyway, or if it applied to both the new passive modules and the consumable ones. This makes a pretty big difference in what you want to buy for your ship though, because while the mining consumables are pretty reasonably priced, so it's not too big of a deal to lose those, just kind of an annoyance, the high-end passive subcomponents get quite pricey, and if they also don't get returned to you when you claim your ship, they're probably not worth using with the game's current stability. To test this, I had a bit of an accident involving one of the new cool looking asteroids, and after claiming my ship I was pretty disappointed to see that all of the subcomponents that I had equipped were gone, even though only one of the three was a consumable. So this is very annoying because it means that you lose any equipped subcomponents anytime you have to claim your ship, even if it's for a 30K. Unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, this basically makes most of these new passive subcomponents dead on arrival because I don't know that many people who are willing to risk losing up to 6 figures worth of credits if anything goes wrong with the game. Even with 3.12 being relatively stable, that sort of potential setback in credits is just not worth the few percent increases in laser power or other stats that these components can provide. So yeah, I really hope that what we heard on Star Citizen Live is just a miscommunication and this isn't how it's intended to function, because otherwise I don't see many of these higher end subcomponents getting much use at all. I know I'm not spending 60,000 credits every time my game crashes or I get a 30K, and it's a real shame that they spent the time to add all of these new things, but they're probably not going to get used all that much unless they change this. Thankfully though, not all of the passive modules are super expensive, so they have a variety of these new modules which each focus on improving different stats, and they often come with a trade-off to a different stat. And then for each of these types of modules, there's usually 3 different versions where the cheap ones offer small improvements in one area with about equal trade-offs in a different area, while the higher tier and more expensive ones have bigger improvements with less of a trade-off, but again at a much higher price. Like I said though, the entry-level versions of these modules can be pretty cheap, so while I'm not going to be taking a look at the expensive ones today since I don't think they're going to be worth it in pretty much any situation since they're so easy to lose, I will take a look at the ones that are 6,000 credits or cheaper. Losing that many credits still hurts, but unless you're super unlucky, you'll probably be making more than that. The next tier up of components start at 12,000 and go up from there, and that's more than I'm willing to risk. Anyway, I am happy about how they have the shop listing set up for these components. I find it really annoying that for most components you just get a category like industrial or civilian, and then a letter for the grade, which tells you a little bit about the quality of the component, but I usually end up alt-tabbing just to look up the real stats. For these though, you get to see exactly what effects they have, which is very nice, so you can make a more educated decision about what you want to do for your loadout without having to leave the game. So I'm going to go through all of the reasonably priced ones now, and then I'll give my opinions on what I think some good loadout combinations are later. So the first one we have here is the FLTR, or filter, and like the name suggests, this filters your ore as you're collecting it. This one is on the higher end of the ones that I'm going to be covering at 6,000 credits, and it slows your extraction speed by half, but it reduces the amount of inert materials you collect by 10%, which is pretty substantial. Also, this bonus is pretty much always going to be useful, because it means that you can use more of your storage space for the valuable ores instead of inert materials, so yeah, this seems like an overall good subcomponent. Next we have the Vaux module, or however you say that, and I'm going to talk about two of the versions here since they're both reasonably priced at 2,000 credits and 6,000 credits for the slightly upgraded version. So these modules are interesting because they reduce the instability of a rock, which is how much the charge meter jumps around, but then they also reduce the window that you have to keep that bar in to fracture the rock. So yeah, I don't know about these because they kind of seem to contradict their own function, but maybe if you only plan on mining stuff where the instability is really the problem, like Quantanium, they could have some use. Next is the focus module, which I think is another pretty useful one, especially for the prospector. So this one costs 4,000 credits, and it makes the rock you mine a bit more unstable, but it also lowers the resistance a bit. This is pretty valuable though, because even with the Helix, which is currently the best mining head, the prospector can still struggle to crack those bigger rocks. So yeah, this might make it a bit more challenging to not overcharge things as you're mining, but it could be really useful if you're right on the edge of being able to break a certain rock. Another module is the Rieger module here, which is another one I don't think is super useful. It increases the size of the optimal charge window, but it decreases your laser power quite a bit, and it's not even super cheap at 6,000 credits. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to be picking up one of these. Onto a slightly better module, we have the Torrent module here for 4,000 credits. This one slightly increases your laser power, but it also increases instability. Again, this one might be somewhat useful, but the increase in power you get from it is very small, especially compared to what the consumable modules can do. And then the last two passive modules I'm going to mention are the XTR and XTRL modules, which are 2,000 and 6,000 credits each. Personally, I don't think these are worth using or using up one of your subcomponent slots on. So their purpose is to speed up your extraction speed, but they also reduce your laser power in doing so, and just like I mentioned, that's a really important stat, especially for the prospector. Extraction speed, on the other hand, is not really all that important. When you're mining, you spend most of your time flying around looking for a good rock, and then once you find it, you spend most of your time with it fracturing it. The amount of time it takes to extract the minerals from the rock that you've broken down is pretty inconsequential compared to everything else, so that combined with the fact that these hurt your laser power is why I'm not going to recommend these. Moving on to active modules, all of these are priced reasonably enough that I wouldn't avoid using any of them just out of fear of losing them, and you can actually use them 5 times each if they don't go poof before then. They do vary in the amount of time that they're active for though. Starting with the Brandt module here, this one could be very nice to have when you're breaking up the smaller chunks of a rock into the collectible pieces. So this module lasts 90 seconds, and for those 90 seconds it makes it much easier to keep a rock at a very precise charge level. It really reduces instability and also even slows down the charge rates a bit so you have more time to react to any changes. It's not going to let you mine rocks you wouldn't have been able to otherwise, but it sure will make it a lot easier to crack. Next we have the Forel module here, which I really like. This really bumps up the effective power of your laser by reducing the rock you're mining's resistance by a whole 20%. It does add a bit of instability, but if you really just want to chew through a rock quickly, this one can be useful, and on those big 6,000 mass rocks you'll be glad to have it. Moving to a slightly less useful module, we have the Lifeline module. So this module is basically just for emergencies if you know you've overcharged a rock and it's going to explode. I could see this being useful on a mole, especially if you're solo mining, because then you have no other option if you've overcharged a rock than just absorbing the explosion. But if you have a pilot or if you're in a prospector, then you could just move away from the rock. But yeah, I guess if you're solo mining in a mole, you might as well grab one of these since it's only 800 credits for 5 charges and it might save you from blowing up your ship. The Rime module here is an interesting one. If you look at the description, it says it makes rocks more stable and safer to mine, but what it actually does is reduce the level of charge of the rock. So this is really interesting, and it behaves different from most of the other modules since it basically just has an instant effect on the rock that you're mining, and then a few side effects that last for 30 seconds. Next we have the Stampede module, which is another one I don't think I would use. So this one's main effect is to greatly increase the charge rate of rocks. That does sound kind of nice at first since it seems like it could save you some time, but again, just like the modules that speed up your extraction speed, you usually don't spend all that much time fracturing. Also, it makes it much harder to control the process, so you might end up wasting time in the end by overcharging the rocks accidentally and then having to wait for them to cool off. I think this one's going to be a pass from me. Moving on to a more useful active module, here's the Optimum module. It's on the more expensive side for consumables at 3000 credits, and it only lasts 20 seconds, but it massively increases the optimal charge window. So yeah, I don't think this one will help with the prospector's lack of power, but it will help make difficult rocks easier to crack. Another active module here is the surge module, and this one does what the name would suggest and gives you a massive surge of power. This one is another interesting one, but again, I don't think I'll be using it personally. For me, if you can't break a rock with your current setup, even something like this that boosts you to a certain charge level doesn't seem like it would be that useful because you wouldn't be able to sustain that level. And then it's also just kind of dangerous to use because that increased the shatter damage and overcharge rate that it causes. So I see a lot of situations where you either waste a charge of this because you have to wait since you accidentally overcharge the rock, or even worse, you just blow yourself up. Again, this could be useful in some situations though, so let me know if you're a fan of this module and what situations you use it for. The last active module is another pretty useful one. This is the Torpid, and it increases your effective cracking power by reducing rock resistance, like the Forel that we talked about earlier, but it also slows down the charge rate so you get greater control while using this module. Again, this is going to be useful for mining those larger rocks in a prospector, and especially well suited to unstable things. This is one of the ones that I really like. Moving on to actually using some of these modules, I want to start by saying that I really like the mining UI now. A few of the text items are still a little small, but they've got pretty much every piece of information you'd want to see on screen, and now the charge indicators are also a decent size. It's cool to see everything from the composition of the rock that you're currently mining, what's in your storage, and even what submodules you have equipped all in one place. Alright, but moving on to suggestions for what components to use, my first suggestion is that if you don't currently have the Helix mining laser, you want to save your credits until you can buy one of those. If you're mining in a prospector, you probably want to earn the credits to buy that laser doing something else because the stock mining head is just that bad. You could buy a mining head besides the Helix first as a first upgrade and then work your way up, but even the Helix has trouble with a lot of rocks, so using a worse laser can be very frustrating because you'll end up skipping a lot of good rocks since you just can't crack them. Also, the Arbor, which is the stock laser, only has one submodule slot, so you can't really do all that much with that anyway. So yeah, first make sure to get a Helix so that you have that raw cracking power, and then worry about the submodules. So the submodule loadout that I think I'm going to be using is one filter module, and then I have two types of active components, one Torpid and one Forel module. Now you can only have one active module enabled at a time, but I use each of them for slightly different purposes, so that's fine with me. So both of these active modules actually help when you're using a prospector because they're the ones that drop the rock's resistance by 20%, which can really help with those bigger rocks, like the ones in the 5500 mass and up range. However, the Torpid module slows down the charge rate, so that can be helpful for unstable ores like Quantanium rocks, and the Forel doesn't have this effect, so you can just use it for more general purpose applications. Oh, and if you're wondering how to activate these active modules, because I hadn't used them before, you just hit Alt, and then the number corresponding to the slot that you put the consumable in. So to activate the one that's over on the left side of the mining UI on top, I'd just hit Alt 1. So the active modules that I chose for this loadout are a little redundant in that they both have that 20% resistance drop as their main feature, so you could either leave one of them off so that you're risking less components when you're going out on mining runs, or add another cheap passive module, maybe like a focus module, to further bring down that rock resistance. Keep in mind though, the focus module only brings down resistance by 6%, while the consumables bring it down by 20% and are cheaper at under 2,000 credits, where the focus is 4,000 credits. And even though the focus should be reusable, with 5 uses on the consumables, you might end up 30k'ing more often than you actually end up using all your charges, so the passive component being reusable might not even be a bonus. Another option though is you could swap out one of those active modules for an active Brandt module, which is the one that helps you with breaking really unstable rocks, so like finishing off those smaller bits of Quantanium, which can be really annoying to get to the right charge level. So if you find yourself often struggling with that sort of thing, that one could be really useful. But yeah, the setup that I like with the two active options that reduce the resistance and that one passive filter costs just under 10,000 credits, and it gives you a nice boost in performance. So I think that's what I'm going to be running going forward. But let me know what modules you think you'll use though, and what consumables you have been using. Now the setup that I just went over works best for a prospector since it focuses on allowing the prospector to mine larger rocks than it would otherwise be able to, since that's its main drawback. The mole on the other hand usually doesn't have an issue and can mine pretty much any rock, especially if you're operating multiple lasers. Because of that, you could use those slots to equip different consumables, like some of the ones that reduce instability, which could be useful on the mole since you can't control your distance from the rock as a laser operator, so it would be nice to have a little bit more leeway when you're being precise and charging up those rocks. However, with 3 different mining heads, that's a lot of subcomponents to be equipping and then risking losing, and since none of the affordable runs are really must-haves with the mole's already sufficient laser power, you might just be better off skipping submodules for now when you're using the mole. And then one of the other setups that I tried, because I thought it might be good, was using 3 filter modules, since I do really like the idea of having less inert materials. Having a 30% reduction to inert materials does sound really nice in theory, but with 3 of them equipped here, that 50% reduction to extraction speed really adds up. You can see here that it took forever to extract these normal sized rocks, and while I did say earlier that extraction time usually doesn't matter, in this case it does when it takes 8 times as long. Also, this setup with 3 of them would cost 18,000 credits, so that is a lot of money to be spending on replacement components, and it's not really in that affordable range anymore. So yeah, while this one sounded good in theory, I don't think I'd actually recommend trying it unless you're really patient. Now I just want to quickly go over the mining experience I had during PTU, and it was actually pretty good other than a few server performance related things. So I mainly hung out around Crew L1, and I had no trouble finding a ton of rocks, and it didn't take too much time to find decent rocks either. Also, it's just nice to have the new gas clouds in as scenery, and it's cool to be able to mine near the station and see it off in the distance. Again, I also just want to take time to appreciate this mining UI too, because I think now that it's been tweaked a bit, it's definitely way better than it ever has been. The small gripe I did have when mining though is that breaking rocks seems to still really depend on the server doing well. Thankfully, I didn't seem to notice the old issue where the charge indicator also depended on server performance, and the indicator would often lag out for a second or two, and then once it updated, the rock would be overcharging because you couldn't see what was going on. But the issue I had here was that after I got the fracturing bar on a rock full, and the rock was supposed to break into smaller pieces, I would have to wait multiple minutes for the rock to actually break. Hopefully this gets fixed soon, and I have a feeling that it's related to the carts and the issues with server performance that they cause, because they really seem to tank server performance when people are messing around with them. If it remains like this though, you're gonna have to be really patient to be a miner in 3.13. Lastly, I just want to touch on refining, because that's really what kept me away from mining in 3.12. It would have been fine if the refineries were operating normally, but in the live patch all of them are massively overloaded. Here in the PTU, things were fine though, and CRU L1's refinery was only showing 30% usage. But again, I wouldn't take this as a guarantee that it's going to be fixed in live, because it's just the PTU, and there's a chance that these low levels of usage are just because no one wants to mine during the PTU. I really hope that they did change some values though, because otherwise getting your stuff refined is going to be a slow, annoying, and expensive process again. Alright, so that's about it for this video. I'm kinda bummed that these new passive components ended up being kinda disposable with how they're currently implemented, but I guess at some point we might be able to ensure them so you don't just lose them constantly. If not though, I guess we can just wait until CIG fixes 30Ks to be able to use those more expensive modules. Let me know what you guys think about this though, and if you'll be risking your credits to get some bonuses while mining. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.